There is a massive difference between playing Microsoft Flight Sim and flying a real-world Airbus A320. I'm a real-world Airbus captain, and today we're going to look at a real flight from Manchester to Chambery in our brand new simulator. So today we're going to be showing you how to fly this route like a real-world captain. And there won't be any GeoGuessr or watching streams in the cruise today. We'll be giving you real world tips how to stay ahead of the aircraft. Very important, especially since you guys at home don't have a co-pilot. So if you want to fly professionally at home, this is how you do it. So we're going to assume you know how to use SimBrief. We've generated a flight plan and uploaded it. We've used Fenix, we've done the weight and balance and the performance, and we've uploaded that as well. But now what we're going to do is show you what I would do differently on a normal departure and a normal setup. So first thing you need to do is you need to do the aircraft acceptance. So we're going to go down to the EFIS panel. I'm going to press and hold the recall button for 3 seconds. For 3 seconds, and it's going to come up hopefully with normal, and anything that's in the background that isn't showing will come up there. We're then going to press the door page and we're going to have a look at the oxygen pressure, make sure that's sufficient for the flight. We're then going to look at the hydraulics and make sure that the hydraulics are sufficient for the flight, and then we're going to check the engine oil quantity and make sure that's sufficient for the flight, and that is the aircraft acceptance completed. All the procedures we're doing here normally done between the two crews, obviously. Because I haven't got a first officer doing the pilot monitoring bits while I'm doing my pilot flying bits, we've encompassed it all into one, and I'm going to show you a nice easy way to do it all in a safe fashion, in a timely fashion, good workload management, and it will work out nicely for you guys at home. So the performance is done. We're now going to have a look at the departure. So we've got the Samba departure off of 23 left. It's going to be the Samba 1 Yankee, and I've put that in. As you've probably seen on the FMGC tips video we did, there is a speed restriction around the corner. You want to be going less than 220 knots for good track keeping and noise abatement purposes. So our green dot is 213. So I can put in green dot plus 5, gives you a margin. You don't really want to be flying around at green dot unless you have to. We have 218, and that will give us a good track keeping around the Samba 1 Yankee as we fly the first turn. When we're inbound to Tabley, that's when we can then manage the speed. On the Sonex departure, it's just on the first turn, and some departures out of Manchester don't have any of this at all, like the Eclade where you just climb straight ahead. Now I know you're not doing this at home, so we're going to set up the secondary flight plan, and we would do this in real life on every departure. Most airlines in the secondary will have a pre-programmed engine out procedure, so if you lose an engine at the wrong point or the right point, it will have a procedure to you to fly. These are calculated and they're airline specific. We obviously haven't got that, but what we can do is use the secondary to our advantage should we need to make an urgent return. So we go to the secondary, we copy the active, we've got runway 23 left, and the departure, normally at the top you would have for the departure the engine out one. We haven't got that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a lateral revision at the first point available. I'm going to put EGCC as the new destination. Then I'm going to put in the arrival for runway 23 right. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to put in somewhere sensible to go and hold. So should you have a problem, you want to go and hold somewhere away from the airport, but somewhere that's safe. Now Dane is just to the south of the airport, so I'm going to put that in there, and I'm going to put in the hold of Dane as well. So if anything happens, we know that we can proceed at some point once we're above minimum safe altitude of 3,500 feet off to Dane to hold. I've got the arrival in, and I'm going to set up the FMGC with the minima 450. Engine out acceleration 3,500, and I'm going to put the weather in as well. So that's all set up ready in case we need to return. And if you're doing realistic flight sims and you have the sim set up to give you random failures, that's all ready to go. The time you don't want to be messing about trying to set up an arrival is if you're flying with an emergency, one engine for example, or you've lost some hydraulics. You don't want to be worrying about that. You want all that done before you get anywhere near the sky. So once the FMGC and the aircraft is all set up, the next thing you would do in real world operations is you would have a brief. Now, we used to use an acronym called WANT, Weather, Aircraft, NOTAMs, Threats. We don't use that anymore, but for you guys at home, it's a really good habit to get into because you don't want to be behind the aircraft playing catch up. So let's have a think about it. So the weather, well, it's raining on and off. There's maybe some bad weather ahead, some cells that you want to avoid, so you'd have the weather radar on. Whenever you talk about a threat, it's all well and good saying the threat. Also think about how you're going to mitigate it. So there's weather on the weather radar, so we'll have to take headings around. We'll need anti-ice on when the temperature drops below 10. The aircraft, is the aircraft fit to fly? Yes, it is. Are there anything in the minimum equipment list that we're having to deal with today? No, there isn't. It's a perfectly serviceable aircraft. The NOTAMs, we're at Manchester. You can get the NOTAMs on any weather app. And then it comes to threats. What are the big threats and how are you going to mitigate them? Well, with Manchester, we're going off 2-3 left. So one big threat is we're going to be crossing the landing runway. So we need to make sure we're at the right holding point. We make sure we're cleared to cross. We can put the strobes on as we're crossing, increase visibility, have a really good look up, final approach to make sure there's nothing on short final. Make sure that you have a really good situation awareness of where you are. So we're getting ready to go now. The fuel's on, so we can put the centre tank pumps on. They would always be off during refuelling. And we can put the seatbelt signs on now as well. They're on. And we can start the APU. Now, unless it's really hot or really cold, you would normally have the APU off and be running off ground power. APU burns 2 kilos a minute, so the airlines like you not to use it too much because it saves a little bit of fuel. The airlines are quite keen on you saving as much fuel as possible. When we get going, we're going to show you how to do single engine taxi. Again, airlines like you to do single engine taxi. Single engine taxi departure can save up to 18 kilos. The APU is now running. I'm now going to start the stopwatch. Airbus require us to wait 3 minutes before we put the APU bleed on, and that stops fumes getting ingested into the air conditioning system and causing fume events in the flight deck or in the cabin, which account for a lot of diversions each year. So we've got 3 minutes on the stopwatch. I'm pressing the APU bleed and I'm going to disconnect the ground power. I'll stop my stopwatch because I don't need it anymore and clear that. It's worth doing a checklist. Now you can download these off the internet. We've got one. I'm going to go to the EFIS page. I'm going to press the fuel button and I'm going to go to the McDo and I'm going to press the data and position monitor button. And I'm going to look at the nav at the bottom of the 3 IRSs and making sure that those are acceptable. And again, you can download a graph from the FCOM that shows you whether the IRSs are usable or not. So we're going to do the aircraft acceptance checklist. In a thing like a 152 or a PA28, the checklists are read and do. You read and you do whatever you need to do. But in real world operations, these are normally challenge and response, and they just cover the things that you must have done. So these are things we've already done and we're checking that we've done them. And the pilot monitoring would normally read and then I would answer, so it would be challenge and response. But because it's only me, I'm going to do it now. So it's cockpit preparation checklist. Aircraft acceptance is completed. You saw us do that. Fuel quantity, we've got 8.5 tonnes and I can see on the lower screen it's balanced. The seat belts, they're on and it says that there. Anything on the overhead panel we consider rumour. If it's there, it's fact. ADIRs, they're in nav and I can see that on there. And the baro ref, we have a QNH of 1015, and I can confirm that because I asked for the weather earlier. I went to the ATSU AOC menu and I asked for the digital ATIS, and I'll get an updated one before we go anywhere. Departure, send. And the QNH is 1015, and you confirm it with a current source because you don't want to get the QNH wrong. And again, we've got a video coming out about that very soon. So that's the cockpit preparation checklist completed. We would now do the before start checklist. The parking brake is on. Takeoff data, I've got V1133, V2146, and you read it off your PFD, not off of here. That's rumour, that's fact. Windows, you would check they're closed and the red ring is showing. PED is in flight mode, we don't want that interfering. And the doors, they would be closed and armed, and we would check those. The beacon, that's on, and when I put this on we'll be pushing and starting. Beacon is on, and the doors are now closed and armed just like they would be. Now we can do the pushback. The other thing we'll do is we'll put now the transponder to auto, and when we push we'll start the clock.
Release parking brakes, please.
I possess that skill, and the standard operation feature is brakes released, and you check it on there, ready to push. Once we've started the pushback, I will start the clock. That will give you your block time to brakes off to brakes on at the other end. We're delaying the engine start later in the push, saves a bit of fuel. So I'd now click the intercom and say, am I clear to start engine 1? He's already told me we're clear to start 1. So the engine start procedure is you point at the engine mode selector and you would say, engine mode selector, select ignition start. You would wait for the pressure from the APU so that you know you've got the air to start the engines. You would then point to engine 1. Your colleague would normally look to make sure that you're making the right selection and not putting the park brake on by mistake. And you would say starting engine 1. I would lift that, and when I put it back in I'd just give it a little push to make sure it's locked in place. And then you would monitor the engine start. You see the N2 turning. You would wait for that. You have ignition B, which is the B igniters are firing at the moment. There's no fuel flow. The fuel flow's just started and the engine started to light up. You would monitor the instruments while the engine start is occurring. And at 50% you get starter cut out, the bleed goes off, the igniter's stopped, and the engine is now running. The available lights come on, we can now use that engine. So we're going to do single engine taxi. So what I'm going to do now is engine mode selector back to normal. I'm going to go to the overhead panel and I'm going to go up to here and I'm going to put the yellow electric pump on and I'm going to turn the APU bleed off. And then I'm going to come back here.
Parking brakes.
The parking brake is set. Now, when pilot flying has done his flows, pilot monitoring would do theirs. That would be set the trim wheel, arm the spoilers, neutralise the rudder trim, and select the correct flaps. And again, you'd have to look at your performance. If you've got something other than flaps 1, I always put a big bit of paper here with the number of the flap on there. And if it was a 2-engine start, you then press the status page, but it's a single engine taxi, so we're not going to do that. Okay, and as you can see, yet again we've had a bit of a dodgy pushback off of GSX. Welcome to Flight Sim.
Tow truck disconnected, bypass pin removed.
And I would now say, once all of those items are done, I would then say cleared to disconnect, hand signals on the left with the pin, and I would then wait. And as a backup, I would say car and bar, man with the pin, give him a wave, not yet clear. And I would wait until he's clear. If we were doing 2-engine taxi, you could then run the after start checklist, but we're not going to do that because we're single engine. So they're now clear. This is where you would ask for taxi clearance. We go back to the overhead panel, put the runway turn off lights on, and I put the taxi light on. There. Right, park brakes released. I'll then just gently walk the thrust lever up on engine 1, just to give us rolling. And then I would do a brake check. Very gently squeeze the brakes, just to make sure the brakes are working, and then I will steer us back on to the taxi line we want. Ideally we want 6 knots. When we get that, start the stopwatch, and I want 30 seconds after 6 knots, and that will trigger a single engine taxi reading. With single engine taxi, when we get the second engine going, you've got to have 3 minutes of it running at idle before you can use takeoff power. So you need to time it, so you're not going to get to the runway and you've got to sit there with the engine warming up before you actually do your takeoff. So if you're at a really small airport where the runway's close, you wouldn't bother with single engine taxi at all. Where we've got a bit of a way of taxiing here, you've got time to do it, so it's worth doing it. And like I said, it's going to save about 18 kilos of fuel. Alright, I've had me 3 minutes, so I'm going to reset and clear my stopwatch. And while we're in a straight line, I'm going to go back to the overhead panel. I'm going to turn electric pump off, APU bleed on, come away from that, and then I'm going to start engine 2. I'm going to put the engine mode selector back to ignition start, and I'm going to wait for the pressure to start. We've got the pressure. Starting engine 2, again you point, make sure you're making the correct selection. You do not want an action slip. And there I'm starting engine 2. This would all be done by pilot monitoring while pilot flying is taxiing the aircraft. Pilot monitoring will be monitoring the engine, but we know it's going to work. So we're on Echo, we're just about to turn left onto Lima. It's a good idea to verbalise what you think you're going to be doing. There's the sign on the ground for Lima, so I'm going to be turning left here. There's the clunk. I'll start my stopwatch for the 3 minutes. I'm going straight, so engine mode selector goes back to normal, overhead panel, and we can turn off the APU bleed and turn off the APU. Next thing I'm going to press is the status page, which is normal. So I'm just going to stop here for a minute. We've had the call from the cabin's secure, and I'm going to run the after start checklist. The anti-ice is off, it's not required. ECAM status, at the bottom of the EWD, if you've got the little status message, you know there's something on the status page, and we know it's not there, the status is normal. Pitch trim, you would check that off the load sheet, 32%. And the rudder trim is neutral. That's my after start checklist completed. While we're stopped, the reason I've stopped is we haven't got a nose wheel tiller, so I need to do the flight controls. You'd normally do this on the taxi, but I'd need to check the rudder. I don't want to be doing that when I'm taxiing because it's going to do funny steering. So I'm going to check my flight controls. I'm going to go full up, and we check it off the bottom screen. Full down and neutral. Full left. Full right and neutral. And with the rudder, I'm going to check the rudder now. You would normally say rudder, you'd press the steering disconnect on the tiller. It's always a good idea to move the rudder slowly. It's a big bit of metal, you don't want to be pushing it really quickly unless you really have to. So on the check, it will be a nice slow movement on the rudder. Full left. Full right and neutral. So you might think there's no point doing this, but in the real world it's critical, but in flight sim it will add as a reminder to make sure that your side stick and your rudder pedals and your peripherals are actually still plugged in. So once the flight controls are done, pilot monitoring now has a flow to do. various things need to be done. So we set auto brake max in case we need to reject the takeoff. We press the takeoff config button. If the flaps aren't set or something's not right for takeoff, that will give you a warning. We then go to the pedestal. We can put the weather radar on. Auto system 1. And the predictive wind shear, because we want that on. The other thing you can consider at this point is, do I need the engine mode selector to ignition? If you've got heavy rain or standing water or turbulence forecast on takeoff, then you would probably want that on to ignition to keep the igniters firing to protect the engines in the bad conditions. You'd also make sure that you've got takeoff no blue. Cabin blue is acceptable if you're waiting on the cabin. Now we can continue the taxi. So we're now going to turn left and go on to Papa and hold short of runway 23 right. So I've stopped short of runway 23 right. I'm going to set the park brake. I'm going to make sure that it says park brake on the EWD, and I would normally check the gauges next to the landing gear to make sure that the brakes are set, and I'd have a good look out to make sure. I have a thing where I go pins, words and look out, it doesn't move. I'm going to have a look down final approach, and we would now ask air traffic control for clearance. When we've done that last scan, when that's finished, that's now the trigger to do the taxi checklist. So I can now run that. Flight controls are checked. Flap setting, you're checking, you have config 1 there, config 1 there, and it's always safe to have a good look there and make sure. Some people go config 1, but you're checking that the FMGC flap setting is the same as what you've selected. So if I've got 2 here and 1 here, it's your pickup that you haven't got the right flap set. FMA, we've got climb nav blue 1 FD2, radar and predictive wind shear is on, ECAM memo takeoff no blue, and the EFB is stowed. You have a special lock and you want to make sure it's locked in and stowed so it doesn't come off in flight. Can have another look down final approach. Air traffic have cleared us to cross the runway. I go to the overhead panel and I put the strobe light on because that makes it more visible. Can take the park brake off. The other thing you need to look at is the red stop bars approaching the runway go out just as you get there. They're on at the moment, and if in real life they were there, we wouldn't be taxiing past those. I don't know how to get them off.
What about the passengers crossing the runway?
Oh, there. The stop bars are gone, we can continue. So at the holding point now for runway 23 left, there's one other check we need to do. We need to make sure we're taking off on the right intersection on the runway. So we did our performance from Victor Alpha 1, which is further up the runway. We're at Tango 1 there, so we're safe. We've got performance in hand. We've got more runway than we planned. So what we would do is say position validation, Tango 1, runway 23 left. Pilot monitoring would check against the charts, check against what we've perfed and we've written down, and say confirmed position valid. If we'd perfed from Tango and we were going Victor Alpha 1, position would not be valid and we'd have to redo the performance because we've now got less runway than we actually thought we did. So it's always good as a gross error check to make sure you're taking off with the right performance from the right point in the runway. We're now going to do the takeoff. So what we're going to do is go back to the overhead panel. We're cleared for takeoff. We're going to put all the landing lights on. We're going to put the nose light to takeoff. And we're going to go to the pedestal and we're going to set the transponder to TA-RA. We get TA here. Part of the lineup checklist, always check you've got TA-RA, because if you've set TA, it's still going to say TA here. So it's a 2-part check. So we can now run the lineup checklist. Cabin secured for takeoff. Takeoff runway 23 left. Tango 1. Takeoff confirmed. TCAS, TA-RA, and packs 1 and 2, they are on for this departure. We can now do the takeoff. We'll take the park brake off and we'll start taxiing forward slowly. Again, we'll have a look down final approach. We know there's no one landing on 23 left today and we know we're clear for takeoff, but always look and make sure there's nothing coming. Can wave to the people on the hill. There's Matt Cam, he's filming today. Now it's a good idea to do a rolling takeoff. It keeps the airflow into the engine and reduces the likelihood of a surge or a stall. I'm going to apply side stick half forward. I'm going to apply 50% N1 and I'm going to wait for the engines to stabilise. You want the engines to stabilise. Sometimes they run up at different speeds and a low speed RTO can be quite tricky to handle. They are stable. I now select the climb gate. I've got Manflex 66 SRS auto thrust blue. That would be checked. While you're going straight, keep checking your energy instruments for any anomalies that may require you to stop. There's 100 knots. I would normally pilot monitor would normally call 100 knots, and you want stick release by then. V1, I would release the thrust levers. We're not going to stop now. And there's rotate. And I will pitch the aircraft up 3 degrees a second. Once you see the nose moving, that's about right. You've got positive climb on both of those. I'm going to lean over and select gear up. And I've got nav. Can now cover the thrust levers. It's set at about 17.5 degrees. We're climbing up nicely. We're coming to acceleration. And what I like to do is pitch down slowly just before. Aircraft's now accelerating. And I slowly move the thrust levers back. Autopilot 1, I've got thrust climb, autopilot 1, auto thrust. Passing S speed, I will ask for flaps 0, speed checked, flaps 0. I'll disarm the spoilers and normally put the lights out, but I'll do that later. It's tracking nicely and we can see there's some weather around the Tabley area. So in real life I wouldn't want to go through that. It'd be uncomfortable for the passengers. So I'm not going to do that. Once we've passed the MCC 05, I'm going to ask air traffic control for a heading of 250 to avoid the weather, which they will normally grant you. When I pull this, it's going to drop into open climb and we'll get the triple click. In fact, I'm going to do it now. So we've got open climb heading. You heard the triple click. That tells you there's been a downgrade. So it's gone from climb to open climb. Any triple clicks a downgrade. Speed out star. And if you hear the triple click and you weren't expecting it, you need to have a good read of your FMAs and work out what's actually downgraded. Another tip is have your next frequency ready set in your box. So we've got 118580, that's the Manchester approach controller. So it's already set. So at this busy moment, you're not there scratching around trying to dial in frequencies. It's already done. If you're on VATSIM, have a quick scroll through vPilot and have a look who's actually on at the time and their frequencies. So we're going to go into some cloud. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn all the lights off because I don't need those anymore. We're going to go into cloud, so I'm going to put the engine anti-ice on because the temperature, the TAT, is below 10 degrees. So we're going to climb up now to flight level 120. Dialed it in and I've pulled for open climb because managed climb won't work because we're not on a navigation track. And then I would say set standard. You would set the standard. I always press auto brake medium because if I have to do a return, that's an easy thing to miss. And I would read thrust climb, open climb, flight level 120 blue, checked. And again, I wouldn't release the cabin crew at the moment because there's a potential for some turbulence. So we'd leave them strapped in and we would have briefed them before we've even departed about that. I really want to be going in that direction, so I'm going to do that. So passing flight level 100, we would change from constraint to airport unless you still need constraints up. We'd go to the RadNav page and we would clear the RadNavs out unless you still need them so that they're now auto-tuning, and you would copy the secondary because you no longer need the engine out procedure. I normally leave it a while because 10,000 is a bit low. I'd normally wait till I'm well away from my departure airfield before I copy that because I'd still want to go back there if I have an engine failure. Once I'm past sort of Birmingham or coming down towards London area, then I would change it. So I'm going to copy the active. When I'm in the cruise, I'm going to set the secondary up with different approaches and other alternates like we did in the other FMGC tips video. And in here, in the FMGC, I'll go to the climb page, I'll then go to the cruise page and look at the managed speed with cost index 6 of what I've got. I'll put .77 in, I'll put that there, and then I'm going to enter cost index 0. So in the climb, a lot of airlines like you to use cost index 0. It saves, again, a cup full of fuel, but over a year, that's a big saving. I'm also going to keep the speed back at 250 knots to climb us up above this weather that we're approaching a little bit quicker. As you can see, there's loads of it. It's yellow. We need to be going in the right direction. We'll just climb over it. Air traffic clears us up now to flight level 300. So we will set that. We've got thrust climb, open climb. In fact, we can go climb now, flight level 300 blue. And while we're in the climb, we're having a look at the weather ahead. I can see through it, I can see there's a few cells ahead, but it just looks wet rather than anything particularly nasty. And from time to time, again, I'm looking at the lower EWD just to make sure everything's there. Cabin's pressurising as you'd expect, and I'm keeping my eye on the engine instruments as well. I'm monitoring the aircraft, making sure it's doing what I want it to do, and keeping an eye on my flight mode annunciators as well. We were planned at going up to flight level 380. If we look at our progress page, it's saying our optimum 360 and our recommended max is flight level 390. So 380, it's only given me 1,000 margin. Now I like at least 1,500, especially if it's turbulent. You want a good margin between green dot and your overspeed. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to go up to 380, I'm going to go to 360, and that's what we're cleared up to now. We have flight level 360 here on our PFD and it's blue. As we said in one of the other videos, if I just put 1 or any key, put it in the cruise, that now changes to flight level 360. The weather's smoothed out, so I can go to the overhead panel and I can release the cabin crew. And to do that, I'm just going to cycle the seatbelt sign, and the ping in the back lets the cabin crew know it's safe to walk around. What you can also see on the PFD, it's got in blue max cell 077. So that's because I have pre-selected it. Manage that speed. I pre-selected it earlier when I changed the cost index. The reason being is what I don't want to do is level off at cost index 0, sit there at a slower speed, and then put cost index 6 in and watch the engine spool back up again. Every time the engines spool, you get blade creep where the blades will sort of stretch and it reduces the life of the engine. So by doing this, it's actually going to level me off at the speed I want to be at. I can then enter the cost index I want and push for managed speed, and the speed is already there. Really good tip is get in the habit of reading your FMAs yourself. I've just made a change of selection. You've got the white box around climb, and normally you would say climb, pilot monitor say checked, but if you get in the habit of constantly reading the FMAs, it's one of the Airbus golden rules. You need to know what the aircraft's doing, and that's telling you there. So now our SAT on the bottom EWD is at -40, so we don't need engine anti-ice anymore. The engine manufacturers say below that temperature you're not going to get ice. So TAT +10 with visible moisture, SAT -40 is when you need engine anti-ice. So I can select engine anti-ice off, and I will go engine anti-ice is off, and I will read it off my EWD to make sure that it is actually off. If you have one on, just for examples I will show you, one engine anti-ice will show on there. So when you put it on, make sure you've put them both on, because one or both will show on there. You can look at that and think I've got them, but actually you've only got one. So coming up towards the top of climb now, dual pilot SOPs will call for, when you're 1,000 to go, pilot monitoring will say 1,000 to go. So we come up to 1,000 to go. When it comes to 1,000 to go, I will cover the controls just to make sure that the aircraft levels off, and if it doesn't, I can take over quickly. There we have it. 1,000 to go. Expect an FMA change. There it is. Mac out star. Out cruise. And you can see it's gone into selected speed that I pre-selected, and it's higher than what cost index 0 was commanding. I will now enter cost index 6 and I will wait for the managed speed to match what we've got. When it's there or thereabouts, I will then press manage speed. The other thing I'll do is I'll go to the overhead panel. Anything over 10,000 feet, if it's smooth, you can turn the seatbelt signs off. They can come off now. And then I will go to the pedestal and I will put the TCAS mode selector to below, because if we do an emergency descent, I want to see what's below me. What's above me is of no interest. I need to know what's well below me in case we need to go down quickly for any reason. I will now go to the EFIS panel and I will check all the systems pages. I'll have a look at the engine, make sure that the oil quantity is good. It will be lower because a lot of it's been thrown around the engine now. Check the vibrations. I'll have a look at the bleed, make sure that the temperatures are fine and you haven't got any problems there. Pressurization, you're looking, cabin altitude could be 8,000 feet, could be lower. It's still got a slight climb on us. The pressurization controller sorts out the pressurization. Make sure that the vents are shut and the outflow valve is almost shut. Electricals, yep, I want to have a look, make sure everything's there. There's nothing, no high temperatures or anything untoward there. The hydraulics, you can expect the green to be lower. So when we checked it on the ground, it was in the box. It's now the level's quite low, but make sure everything's good there and there's nothing untoward there. Fuel, you want to have a quick look, make sure that it's almost balanced again and there's no apparent sign of any leaks. It's a bit lower on the left because it have the APU running and we did single engine taxi, so you can expect the left to be a little bit lower. APU, yep, that's nothing happening there. Have a look at the conditioning and maybe change the temperature if you're too hot or too cold. Have a look at the doors, yep, that's alright. Check the oxygen again. Wheels, I'll have a look at that, make sure the temperatures are nice. If you get a hot brake reading this far on in the flight and at this height, you can assume probably it's a false reading. Sometimes de-icing fluid will fall onto the brakes and give a bit of a weird sensor. You certainly don't want to be doing the procedure of dropping the gear at this height. Now check the flight controls, make sure everything's there, there's no amber boxes there and everything's running as it should. That's that. So in the cruise, pilot flying, you're flying the aircraft, you're monitoring the aircraft, you're making sure it's doing what you want. Occasionally checking your systems pages, making sure that the aircraft's doing what it should do. Pilot monitoring is running the flight log, doing the radio calls, talking to air traffic. There's lots of frequency changes, direct to here. If you get it direct to, pilot flying will enter it and pilot monitoring will monitor it and confirm. The other thing pilot monitoring can be doing, and you're going to have to do on your own, is you need to get some weathers. You need, if you go nav 160, like I said in one of the other videos, have a look at what airports are around you. Luckily in this area there's quite a few, so you're sport for choice. But you want to pick sensible ones with big runways that can take big aircraft, and print off some weathers. So you've always got in your head a what if scenario. What if we need to go now? And nav 160 is useful because your best bet may be behind you. What I've also done is in the McDo, I have gone and I've asked for weathers for my destination and my alternates. So I've got the weather for Chambery, variable light, variable wind, cav OK, temperatures 24, QNH 1017, and what we can do is we can backset the QNH so it's there ready to go, and we would preset it on the ISIS and that would be there. You have to have that set before you hit 20,000 feet in the descent, so you've got the QNH there, especially when you're flying around high grounds, especially if it's a low QNH, if it's like 986 like it was the other day in Storm Dave. Always think from high to low, look out below. If you're descending into low pressure, your QNH, your height will be a long way out. You'll actually be lower than you think you are, so you need to take that into account with terrain clearance. So I've got the weather and I can now enter that. 24, and that hasn't changed. I'm going config full, auto brake medium, because it's a short runway. The other weather I got is I've got my alternate, which is Leon 0208, so it'll be runway 35 right for landing. I've got the weather for that, and that's nice there as well. I've got the weather for Grenoble, or Grenoble. It's nice there. That's another alternate I can consider. And I've got the digital ATIS for Geneva. Geneva's going to be my secondary alternate. I always have two alternates in case the first one's unavailable or they won't accept you. ILS runway 04, 0604, yep, Cav OK, 1017, 23 degrees. It's glorious. And also got the weather for there as well. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up for the arrival. I'm going to program the boxes. And again, I'm sure this is something a lot of you guys aren't doing. You've got the arrival in, but you've not got the what ifs. So in my primary flight plan, I've got the arrival in, which is the FEDSI 3 Papa that leads me in to the ILS Zulu for runway 18 at Chambery. That's all well and good, we'll talk about that later. And what I've also got in my alternate, I've got a routing down into Lyon. As we can see here, it's in via Milpa. Well, we're not going out over Milpa, so I'm going to take Milpa out because we don't need that. And I'm going to take Cudup out because we don't need that. We ain't going there. This is the area where we're actually going to join because the missed approach brings us out up here. And that gives us a downwind and in for runway 35 at Lyon. That's there ready to go now. So if we have to divert, it's already programmed. I don't need to put anything in. The secondary, I'm going to copy that. And what I'm going to do is going to put the next best arrival in, exactly as we did in the FMGC tips and tricks video. So should the ILS drop off for any reason, I've got the RNAV. And I'll put the minima in and set that up. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change my alternate in the secondary to Geneva, because that's more likely the second alternate that I would use if I can't get into Lyon. So some of you guys may not know that we've done 2 FMGC tips and tricks videos and a how to descend the Airbus video, so go and check them out. There'll be links in the description below, and that will go more into depth about what I'm doing here rather than me go over it again. So now I've got the RMP in, that's in there, and I can put in Geneva runway 04, and I'm going to put the Belus arrival in as well for Geneva. So let's have a look at that. And again, plan is really good for this. It will show you everything you need there. The other thing I'm going to do is set up my radnavs. I've put the Charlie Hotel in. It's an NDB off the end of the runway. When we talk about the arrival and especially the missed approach, this comes into play there. When we're a bit closer, I'll put the CBY VOR in. There's a little gotcha with the CBY VOR. It's up on a hill near Chambery. You can't use it below 5,000 feet because you're below it. You can't see it, no line of sight. But I can put it in anyway just for ranging and distancing for that. In the progress page, I will put LFLB18 in there, and that gives me a bearing and distance to the runway threshold, and that helps with your situation awareness where you are in time and space, especially if you're in cloud. So now we need to talk about how we're going to fly this approach. Normally you would be briefing it and talking about all the things involved, but if you can get in the habit of doing it yourself and thinking ahead how I'm going to fly this, have gates where I want to be at this height, at this speed. To help me, I'm going to press the constraint push button on the EFIS, and again, if you want help, use want. The weather, well, it's a lovely day. The aircraft's still fully serviceable, and the NOTAMs, we've had a look, all the navigation aids are working, there's no taxiway closures, there's no works in progress to affect us. And we've also had a look at the weather at Lyon, Geneva and Grenoble. The weather and NOTAMs are fine there, they're all completely wide open for us today, which makes a change. let's talk about the threats and how we're going to mitigate them. So the big threat round here is the terrain. We're looking at 18,200 feet out to the sort of the southeast is the worst case scenario. As we said before, to mitigate that, we press the terrain push button, and we've got our charts to help us, and we can see where we are in relation to the high ground. As long as we stay on our tracks, we know we're safe, but you do need to know the heights you need to be at these points. So again, I'm going to go to plan, and I'm going to scroll through and have a look. We're doing the Fedzi arrival. It starts at Fedzi, and we can see here this matches with the chart. You want to check it's right. You've got what's called a window. You want to be below flight level 230 but above flight level 200, and the FMGC says 230 there. That's great. It then leads us to Beckery. That says below flight level 150. That says it there. The line is above it, so you want to be below it. Eknos is a max speed 220. That's in there, and we're going to do this funny little wiggle round here, and that's going to then bring us down to Gonva. Again, you've got a window below flight level 90 and above 6,500 feet. That's not a flight level, so ATC would clear you down. So when they clear you down to an altitude, that's when you set the QNH. When you have the QNH set and the cabin has been told to prepare for landing, that's when you would do your approach checklist. We'll do it before that, so they've got plenty of time. Gonva leads us down into Pirup above 6,500, which is fine. It then leads us on to the ILS. Gonva, Pirup, yep, 6,500 to Lima Bravo 403, max 185, mandatory 6,500 feet. You're not far from the Chambery VOR. Like I said, it's on a hill. 6,500, no lower. It then brings you round to India Bravo 18 Zulu, which is the final approach fix. There, you can be down at 5,000. Max 170. So let's have a quick look at this and see what it's saying. So yeah, India Bravo 18 Zulu, max of 170. Okay, that's reasonable, but I think I might put 160 in. The FMGC will always give you a maximum speed. Sometimes you want to be going slower than that. When you brief it as well, you want to have a think, how am I going to fly this? This ILS is a very, very steep ILS. It's one of the steepest in Europe. It's a 4.46 degree glide, so I want to be configured before I start going down the slope. I could do the 3-2-1 that we've discussed in other videos. Flaps 1, 3 miles from descent point, flaps 2, 2 miles from descent point, gear down, 1 mile from descent point, flap 3. I may be going slower than that. Really, I want to be flaps 2 before I get to Lima Bravo 403. And as we come round the corner, I want to be gear down and flap 3 before I start going down the ILS. Once we start going down it, I'll select flaps full. You don't really want to be sitting there straight and level with flaps full out. It's a lot of engine noise and it'll upset the passengers. Flap 3 isn't too bad. So we're going to configure nice and early. Flaps 2 before we get to Lima Bravo 403, and then as we turn around for the ILS, gear down, flaps 3 before we start going down the slope. We'd also talk about the route to our alternates. In the secondary, as I've done in the other video, I've got the RMP. If the ILS drops off for any reason, we would swap that. We'd press the approach button, we wouldn't press autopilot 2, we can continue. In reality, if it happened fairly close to the airport, I'd probably break off and have a think, would I really want to do that? But as a last ditch, we've got that in there. And as I said in the secondary, the second alternate is a route out to Geneva for runway 04. We can do that. So we've talked about the threats, we've talked about how are we going to fly this. Only thing left to do now is let's go and do it. And I'll talk you through it while I'm doing it. The other thing to consider is as well, I've got auto brake medium. I'm going to use idle reverse unless I need any more. It's a fairly short runway and I'm going config full. I've done a landing perf on the EFB and we're going to use, it says 1500 meters of runway, so I know I can land. The minima is very high here. I'm using a minima of 2,739 feet. The airport elevation is around about 800 feet. It has a higher minima because you need to make the decision to go around earlier to make sure that you're clear of the terrain. It has a higher minima. And again, this is what we call a Cat C airport. It's special authorization. You have to do training with your company, you have to do sims, you have to go with a trainer. It's not something that everyone does. You have to be trained for this. So air traffic have just called up and they've cleared us to descend to flight level 200. I've preset me QNH on the ISIS. I can dial in flight level 200 and I will push. I've got descent flight level 200 blue. So to help me with my situation awareness and with my MSAs, when I look at the arrival chart, you can see there's a ring around Pirov with some radials and different altitudes. So I've put that in. I've had to use 2 fixed pages to do it. I've put in Pirov and I've put a radial. It's always the reciprocal of what you want. It's always the opposite. So it says here 179, so I put 359. And I've put 029. And I've drawn that wedge there. So I know in that point there, my MSA is 7,800 feet. In this area here, it's 6,700 feet, and in this area it's 9,700 feet. Outside that it goes up to 18,000. And I've put a 25-mile ring around it, which is exactly what this diagram says on my Navigraph chart for the FedG3 Papa. So as I'm coming in, I can see quite clearly what area I'm in for my minimum safe altitude, and for my situation awareness I now know whether I'm safe or whether I'm not. So we've got 1,000 to go. ATC have called and they've cleared us down to flight level 120. So we've got flight level 120 blue, and that's still safe. So ATC have called up, they've cleared us now to flight level 90, which I've got in flight level 90 blue. So we've got about 15 minutes to landing. I'm going to go back to the overhead. I'm going to put the belts on and I'm going to make my PA. Cabin crew, prepare the cabin for landing, please. What's happened is we've got a shortcut. We're going direct to RIP2 now, and as you can see on the green donut, we're low on the profile. So the FMGC then calculates and it gives you a descent rate of 1,000 foot a minute, which is normally what air traffic would want, rather than a full descent rate. And if you check on your progress page, it tells you your VDEV, and we're coming back on profile nicely. And about this point, ATC will call us up and clear us down to 6,500 feet. So I will dial in 6,500 feet and say set QNH. We would then both set our QNH and say QNH is cross-checked. And it's worth having a look and making sure they're all cross-checked. People are strapped in, the QNH is set, it's time for the approach checklist. So the approach checks, it's a good idea to have the weather available as well. So Barrow Ref, QNH 1017, and that's confirmed off of the ATIS here. Seat belts, they're on. Minimum, Barrow 2739. Auto brake medium, and the FB is stowed. That's the approach checks completed. From a interesting point of view, we've got 6,500 in blue. You can see that on my PFD. If we were cleared down any lower, 6,500 above is there, so any lower altitude it will show you the constraint in magenta, and alt has turned to magenta. So if we leveled off at 6,500, it will go alt constraint star, because there's an altitude constraint in the FMGC. We're going to 6,500, so I'm going to leave that as it is. But if you ever see that, if you dial down a lower altitude and you get magenta, you know it's a constraint coming up ahead of you. Because Governor is on the ILS chart, I've got the ILS chart and I've changed the orientation of the iPad, so I've got the full chart displayed in portrait mode, so I can see all the relevant information. I'm not straining to see it. The last thing you want to be doing flying around hills is straining to see a chart. You can see with the lovely scenery, you can see the high ground that we're approaching, and we're going to fly down the valley that's ahead of us, and Chambery airfield is just on the other side of the lake. So we've got Governor coming into view, Pirov's after it, still 210 at Pirov. After Pirov, I will start configuring the aircraft, flaps 1, then flaps 2. If you look out to the left, you can see there's a great big hill. So as you can see, the Chambery VOR is on the top of that hill. That's why if you're below 6,500 feet, you can't use the Chambery VOR because you're below it. We've passed the D point, so the approach phase is automatically activated. It's very important that happens. On normal line flying, what I would do is I would select speed at 250, activate the approach phase and say selected speed, approach phase activated, so I don't forget. Because if you do forget, you've got a selected speed. If you push it, it's going to go straight up to 250 knots, so you want to make sure that approach phase is active. All you're doing by activating the approach phase is handing over control of the speed to the flaps. So we're past Pirov now, so we're going to start configuring the aircraft. So I'm going to go flaps 1. Speed check, always check your speed. Flaps 1. Speed will start reducing. I always add a little bit of speed to VAP. If I'm doing a flap 3 landing, I add about 7 knots. You have to do a landing perf, but it puts the nose down, makes it look like a normal landing. On any normal flap full landing, I would normally add 2 or 3 knots, just so I've got a little bit of a margin. It's just a personal thing. Some people add speed, some people don't. I always do. Just tends to make for a nicer landing, and you've got a little bit of energy in hand in case you get a little bit of shear. So after this, I can go down to 5,000 feet. So I'm going to put 5,000. I'm going to push, and it should go, there you go, out constraint, descent blue, and we've got magenta. When it comes to descent point, there you are, descent is now armed, we're going down to 5,000, and that's below safety altitude. Flaps 2, speed checked, flaps 2. Because the speed's racing away, I'm just going to use a bit of speed brake. And select a speed of 160 so the engines don't power up. This would be a good time, put some landing lights on. We're clear for the approach. I'm going to push approach. I'm going to put autopilot 2 in as well, and I'm going to read my FMAs. I've got out, glide slope blue, lock star, cap 3 dual, autopilot 1 and 2. You can see the glide slopes coming in. We're going to level at Fox India 18 Zulu at 5,000. Approaching the glide, so just before the glide I want to make sure I've got gear down and flap 3. So 1 dot, I'm going to go gear down, gear down, say select, and then I'm going to arm the spoilers. I'm going to manage the speed now because I want the speed back. We've got glide slope star, missed approach is 6,500, so I would select that now. 6,500 it's blue. And then I'm going to go flaps 3, speed checked flaps 3. And as we're going down, and it's a steep one, I want flaps full, speed checked, flaps full. The radio altimeter is alive, you normally get a call out for that. So it's just because we've gone over some high ground. Glide slopes showing now. Whenever you get the radio altimeter, I like to think as a quick check, Q&H set. And I do a quick check and make sure the Q&H is set on all. And it's correct. So we're nicely in the groove. I'm visual with the runway. The approach is stabilised, and you would call approach stabilised because it is now stabilised. We're on path, we're on speed, we're in the right place. Good idea, run through the missed approach. What am I going to do if I have to go around? It will be toga, pitch up, say go around flaps, reach down, flaps 3, get the autopilot in, read your FMAs, man toga, SRS, nav, it's what you want. If you haven't got nav, push it, positive climb, gear up, and then make sure you monitor it as it flies the missed approach. Below 2,000 feet, the ECAM memo will show 2,000 feet on the rad out. So we're actually coming down now, we've gone past the hill. the rad out's disappeared again. When we get to 2,000 feet in the next 2,500 feet in the next couple of miles or so, the rad out will re-show. When it's 2,000, ECAM memo will go. If you want to get out away early, you can do it like this. You can go cabin is secure for takeoff. You would have a flipper there. Go around out 6,500 feet set, ECAM memo, landing gear down. It is with 3 greens, signs on, they are, spoilers set, they are, flaps set, they are. You can read off that if you want to get it done. The rad out is now alive. At 2,000, the EWD will show the ECAM memo and we can do that. On a really windy day, I would leave the autopilot in very, very late. Checked. 2,000 feet. ECAM memos there. Continue. So landing checks. Landing checks. Cabin is secured for landing. Go around out 6,500 feet set. ECAM memo. Landing no blue. And we're cleared to land. A visual, it's a nice day, so autopilot off. So I'm scanning the instruments, I'm scanning the flight director, I'm looking down at the runway, I'm making sure the picture doesn't change. I've got 2 reds, 2 whites, we're on the glide, we're on the localizer, and everything looks quite nice. It'll be a good Airbus landing. You're not trying to grease this on. This greasing is not what the aircraft FCOM says. You do not want to be doing that. You want to get the aircraft down, get the brakes working, get the spoilers out and get the aircraft stopped, especially on a short runway. And we will be doing a landing vid in the not too distant future. Small corrections, scanning the instruments, looking out at the runway. There is a tendency or a habit, some people would want to duck under and see 3 reds. It's not really necessary, it's 2,000 metre runway. I've got 3 whites.
20, retard. 5.
Spoiler, ground spoilers reverse green and the aircraft is decelerating. I don't need full reverse anymore, 70 knots. And we're going to taxi off at the end. Below 30 knots I can disconnect the auto brakes and it won't shout at me. Spoilers can go disarm, and once we're off the runway we can clean up. Brake fans can go on because they're going to be quite warm. And the next chart you need is your ground chart, where you're going to park. So now you're off, you're taxiing in a safe direction, the aircraft's safe. And when we're going in straight line we can start doing all our after landing scans and checks we need to do. So as you can see, the taxiways here are very narrow, so probably worth stopping if you're going to start doing things, but anyway, we'll do that. The flaps can go up, overhead panel. We don't need the strobes on. We don't need the landing lights on. We need the taxi light on. That should have gone on. And that can go on. Pack 2 can go off. And I'm just going to leave that there. I'm going to go to the pedestal. Transponder goes standby. There you are. Weather radar goes off because you don't need that anymore and you don't want to irradiate anyone in front of you. What I did do is I started the stopwatch after landing. So after 3 minutes we can do single engine taxi should we want to. We don't need the APU for that. There's 3 minutes, overhead panel. Yellow electric pump goes on. And engine 2, we confirm, we shut that down, and then you would say single engine taxi procedure complete. What I like to do is start the APU as late as possible. Takes between a minute and a minute and a half really to fire up, open the flap and fire it up. I can see some ground handlers, so I'm going to quickly go to the overhead panel and let's get the APU going. Pause, start, there it is. Right, so that's where we're going to go. Normally we'd have a marshaller us on stand, or stand guidance. So when we see the marshaller, my old mate used to call him reassuring wavy hand man. Overhead panel. The taxi lights are all off. And I would normally brief me mate, hit the brakes and shout stop if you think we're going to hit anything, but hit the brakes first. In the real world, I try and time it so that as I set the park brake on stand, the APU comes online. And normally you have lines next to it. Oh, look at that, B757. We'll use that. And you look out, and when you're level with the line, the stop line, that's when you stop. I'm using the one on the next stand over, and that line wants to be right under your bum, about there. Park brake set. We've got pins, words, it doesn't move. I'd look at the overhead panel. APU's on. The internal light, if it was dark, I'd put that on. Well, it's not dark, so I'm not going to bother. And then I would say that's off, engine 1, that's off. So it's that's on, that's on, that's off, that's off. And then I would wait for 10% N1, and below 10% N1 I can turn the seat belts off and the beacon. That's off. That's off. And as you taxi on to stand, the first officer would normally say cabin crew disarm doors for arrival, but they're already done. That's it. We've landed and we're here at Chambery. Right, so that's been our tutorial on how to fly a proper flight on an Airbus A320. Don't forget to check the channel for other videos on how to do FMGCs and descents and other ways of flying the Airbus. Let us know if you liked it in the comments below, and we'll see you on the next one soon.